Well, good morning to each one of you. I'm glad that you're here with us, and I was afraid there would be some people who were here with us last week who got it early, and they're not here this week maybe because of it. I don't know. But I hope that they will be here with us in the broadcast eventually, if not now. But we're talking about corporate accountability. Corporate accountability. In part one of this last week, I asked a question simply, would you be comfortable being a member of the Masonic Lodge, or maybe its sister counterpart, the Eastern Stars? Would you be comfortable being a Jesuit? Would you be comfortable being a member of the Knights of Columbus? Now don't worry, I'm not going to ask you those questions again today. I'm going to ask you something else. But we saw that the body of Christ is His church, or His church is called the body of Christ. It is the depository of truth which leads us to the way. The term corporate, again, it comes from the Latin term corpus, simply meaning body. To incorporate is to make into a body a single unit composed of a few or many members. And when a corporate body is religious in nature, we call it a church, or maybe the church is simply the body of Christ. We spoke about the succession of the church, and it is based upon truth, not upon organization, not upon physical lineage or blood lineage. If we believe and live the way, the truth, and the life, we are a part of the body of Christ. We are part of, if you please, the Corpus Christi. But if we are a part of a corporation that is not in the way, the truth, or the life, we are working against the purposes of God and Christ. Now, I said I wouldn't ask you those questions again, and I won't. But today, our continuation is entitled Corporate Accountability. Does it matter? And for those who can see the slides, you see I have a Nazi swastika flag here. And I ask the question, what lessons does this have for Christianity? Well, how could something like that have a lesson for us? Well, I said I wouldn't ask you those questions about being a Jesuit or a Mason, right? So I won't do that. So I'm going to ask you this. Would you be a member of the Nazi Party today? Could you be a member of the Nazi Party today? Why not? Why not? What if you had been raised in the Nazi Party and you were raised to believe that it was good and that they had great ideals, but it was only as you matured and began to think for yourself, and by the way, true education teaches us to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts and ideas. And so you were raised with other men's thoughts and ideas, but you began to think for yourself, and you began to see the evil of what the Nazi Party was like. You might have a lot of family and friends in the Nazi Party. If you left, if you denounced it, you might lose your influence, you think. Would you feel that way? Would you say, no, I'm going to stay here because I have an influence here? No. No, you wouldn't do that, would you? You would leave and with earnest tones explain to those you loved why you had to leave and the great danger they had in staying in the Nazi Party. But we're not through, are we? Would it be okay? Would it be okay if you belonged to the KKK, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan? Interesting name. What in the world does that mean, Ku Klux Klan? Klan is like a family, right? Ku Klux comes from a Greek word. It's parts of a Greek word that sort of means circle. So it's like a family circle. The Ku Klux Klan is a family circle, if you please. A very tight family circle. Would it be okay to belong to the KKK today? What's wrong with wanting to keep racial purity? Friends, there's a lot wrong with that. Because the Bible says we've been made of one blood, not many bloods. We all belong to the same race, believe it or not. We belong to the human race. There's just subdivisions of how we look upon people. But the KKK, with their burning of the crosses, their lynchings, and things like that. And by the way, I was thinking of showing you something like that, but I decided not to. When we were at camp meeting, Brother John Christoph said, I've got something to show you, but if you have children, hide their eyes first. He says, if you have a weak stomach, hide your eyes, because I'm going to show you something that may be surprising. And what he showed us was plastic, artificial body parts that looked like they had been dismembered. They looked pretty real, but they weren't real. But what I'm going to show you is real. So you may want to hide your eyes if you're weak. This is not plastic, this is real. This is the body of Emmett Till, a young black boy that was killed by white supremacists. People with the ideas, the same ideals of the Ku Klux Klan. His crime was looking at a white woman. This is what he looked like after he'd been beaten. His mother insisted the casket be opened so people could see what had been done to him. Would it be okay to belong to the KKK today or something like that? Well, let me move on to a little better picture. This is a picture of my mother, Mary Lou Sinnott. I treasure the memory of my mother. How do you think I would react to someone calling her an old whore? What if someone said she was a witch? What if someone told me, I don't think you should keep company with such people? How do you think I would react? What if it was your mother, or your father, your wife, or your husband? What about if it was your daughter? Someone called your daughter a whore, a prostitute, or they called your son a pimp, or they called your granddaughter a whore. I want to tell you something, friends. I desire to be a man of God. And if someone called me a pimp or a bum or a sluggard, it would not provoke me to wrath. But you call my daughter something evil, and I will most certainly defend her. If you don't believe me, go back 22 years and ask her first employer. Now, how is it? And I ask you this sincerely. How is it? And I don't think what I expressed is any different than what anyone who's listening to my voice now thinks. How is it, I ask you, that we can have such a defensive nature for those that we love upon this earth, and yet allow our Father and His Son, our Savior, to be defaced and misrepresented theologically and in their character? How can we belong to associations or corporate bodies who do this, and then we don't say anything, but play along like all is well, and we agree? You will have to answer for yourself. But for me, I've come to the clear conclusion that I cannot do this, and one of the reasons is corporate accountability. Corporate accountability. I want to look at the God of the Old Testament for a few minutes. And by the way, the God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament as well, isn't He? The God of the Old Testament. The Bible tells me that rebellion broke out in Israel on their way to the land of promise. After they left Mount Sinai, Korah, who was from the tribe of Levi, in connection with Dathan and Abiram, who were the tribe of Reuben, challenged the leadership of Moses. In response, Moses commanded the leaders and those associated with them to appear before God at the sanctuary so that Jehovah might reveal His will on who should be leading Israel. Dathan and Abiram refused to come. The Lord then ordered all the congregation of Israel to separate from the tents of these men. Because Dathan and Abiram would not appear at the tabernacle, Moses went to their tents, followed by the elders of Israel. And here's what we read in Numbers chapter 16 and verse 25. Numbers 16:25. And Moses rose up and went unto Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And now I want you to observe carefully what happened next. Moses spoke to the congregation, and he said these words as recorded in verses 26 and 27. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these what kind of men? Wicked men. and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. So they get up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents, and they weren't alone. Their wives and their sons and their little ones. Here we have the families of Dathan and Abiram. We might even call them corpuses, corporate entities, families. They were all a part of a clan. They had their wives, their sons, and their little children standing together. But who had sinned? Who was really the sinners? It was two men, Dathan and Abiram. They had sinned. The heads of the household, the heads of these corporate identities, the heads of these clans, if you please. But here were ties of loyalty, ties of kinship. Maybe the voice of God was still ringing in their ears from Mount Sinai when he said, "Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother." Would their corporate identification overrule individual responsibility? Which would win out? How would the decision of Dathan and Abiram affect even the little children? Interesting, the word for little children here in the Hebrew is taf, and it means infant. We're not talking about teenagers. We're talking about small children. This word is also used in Ezekiel 9 when the slaughtering angel is told to slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, tough and women. Would God separate the little children from the judgment upon their fathers who had sinned? Let us see what the record says, continuing in Numbers 16, verses 28 and 29. And Moses said, "Hereby ye shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of mine own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord has not sent me." He says, if these men continue to live and they die just a common death like everyone else dies, then God didn't send me. That means something's coming, doesn't it? Yes. Verse 30 and 31. Moses says, "But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth, and swallow them up with all that pertaineth unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord." And it came to pass, as he made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them. And then what happened? Verse 32 and 33. "And the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that pertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation." That seems hard, doesn't it? This is a God of love. This is the God who sends glad tidings. The families of Dathan and Abiram fell together under the judgment of God. And why did they do that? It's because they refused to separate themselves from their corporate identity. However, the record also notes something about the sons of Korah. Notice what it says in Numbers 26, verses 10 and 11. "And the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed them up together with Korah, when the company died, what time the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a sign. Notwithstanding, the children of Korah died not." The children of Korah died not. The children of Dathan and Abiram, they died. But the children of Korah died not. The sons of Korah did not appear with their father and the 250 princes who had assembled at the door of the sanctuary to challenge the leadership of Moses and Aaron. The sons of Korah chose to exercise their individual responsibility and refused to be identified in or with that corporate entity, that corporate clan, that family, which initiated rebellion, and thus they escaped the judgments of God. That's one story of the Old Testament that we find very helpful. There's another story that would come a little later in the book of Joshua. When Jericho was to be taken, instruction was given, very strict instruction. And we read about it in Joshua chapter 6 and verses 18 and 19. He says, "And ye in any wise keep yourselves from the cursed thing, lest ye make yourselves accursed when ye take of the accursed thing, and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of brass and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord." Now notice he says, you're not to take anything. Because if you do, if you take the accursed thing and make the camp of Israel what? Wait a minute, wouldn't I just make myself accursed? Or maybe just even my family if they agreed with me? No, he says you'll make the camp of Israel accursed. They had been specifically warned. Yet what happened? Well, they had an Achan in their problem. There was an Achan there. Joshua 7:1. But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing. Who committed the trespass? Who does it say committed the trespass? Israel. Israel. But it wasn't Israel, was it? It says, "For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Achan?" Against the children of Israel. There was a corporate accountability here. The result was that when Israel went to destroy the city of Ai, 36 good men died who did not need to die, because God held that nation accountable as a body for what that one individual did. When Achan was found out, what happened? Well, let's go on here to Joshua chapter 7, verses 20 through 22. "And Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done." Verse 21. "When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment," and I've always wondered what made it so good. It was an accursed thing. What made it so good to him? "A goodly Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight." And by the way, we read earlier that was all supposed to be consecrated to the Lord, right? "Then I coveted them, and took them, and behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it." Now where was it at? It's in the tent. Who also lived in that tent? His family. It's very apparent the family was informed of what happened. The family was not in the dark on what happened. "So Joshua sent messengers, and they rendered the tent, and behold, it was hid in his tent, and the silver under it." So I want to ask you a question. Was only Achan stoned, right? Joshua 7, verses 24 and 25 now. "And Joshua and all Israel took him, Achan, the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the garment, and the wedge of gold, and his sons and his daughters, and even his oxen, and his asses, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had, and they brought them into the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, Why hast thou troubled us? What you did has troubled us. The Lord shall trouble thee this day." And all Israel stoned him with stones and burned, what's the next pronoun? Them. Not just him, them, with fire after they had stoned, what's the next pronoun? Them. Not him. Them with stones. Men are responsible not only for the sins they themselves commit, but also for sheltering evildoers by withholding information that might assist those responsible for administrating justice. We are told in the book, Patriarchs and Prophets, on page 497, paragraph 2, Achan's sin brought disaster upon the whole nation. For one man's sin, the displeasure of God will rest upon his church till the transgression is searched out and put away. The influence most to be feared by the church is not that of open opposers, infidels, and blasphemers, but of inconsistent professors of Christ, those who are the ones that keep back the blessing of the God of Israel and bring weakness upon his people. But this isn't the only lesson from the God of the Old Testament. The Bible tells me about a prophet, Jonah. Remember Jonah? He said, "Arise, go to Nineveh, tell them 40 days this city is toast." Did Jonah want to go? No, he didn't want to go. Went up to Tarshish, got on a ship, tried to sail away. Jonah was disobedient to God's commission to go to Nineveh. He got on that ship, and what was going to happen? God was going to destroy that whole ship because of that one man on it. In Jonah 1, verses 14 and 15, wherefore they cried unto the Lord. This is the men on the ship. They're crying to Jehovah. These are probably idol worshippers. But they're now calling to Jehovah, the God of Jonah. See, they're not crying just to the Lord, any Lord. It's all capped, capital L-O-R-D. They're crying unto Jehovah and said, "We beseech thee, Jehovah, we beseech thee, let us not perish for this man's life. Don't let us die because of him. And lay not upon us innocent blood, for thou, O Lord, hast done as it pleased thee." So they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. It's not the only lesson, though. There's more. Anybody remember Jeremiah? Jeremiah? Well, in chapter 26 of Jeremiah, as usual, we find Jeremiah has been instructing the people to obey the law of God, to quit and to cease from their sin. And if they would not, here's what God would do. Jeremiah 26 and verse 6. He says, "Then will I make this house like Shiloh, and will make this city a curse to all the nations of the earth." What was the reaction? "Oh, we just love this guy. He's a good prophet. We like him. He speaks smooth words. We like what he says." Verse 11, Jeremiah 26:11. "Then spake the priests and the prophets unto the princes and to all the people, saying, This man is worthy to die, for he hath prophesied against this city as ye have heard with your ears." Had he done that? Absolutely. The problem wasn't that he said the truth. The problem was they didn't like the truth. Notice carefully what Jeremiah replied to them and what he said. Jeremiah 26, verses 14 and 15. "As for me, behold, I am in your hand, to do with me as seemeth good and meet unto you. But know ye for certain, that if ye put me to death, ye shall surely bring innocent blood upon yourselves." End of sentence. No, it doesn't end there, does it? He says, "You will bring innocent blood upon yourselves and upon this city and upon the inhabitants of it. For of a truth the Lord has sent me unto you to speak all these words in your ears." What they were going to do would certainly bring a judgment upon the other people in the city, because there was a corporate accountability. God looked upon them as a corpus, as a family, as a clan, and he was going to judge them even by individuals. Now I ask you a question. Is God different today? There are those among the professed people of God, and even among the one true people of God, one true God people, who would have us believe that the God with whom we have to do today is not the same as the God of yesterday. But what does inspiration say? In Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6, "For I am the Lord, I am Jehovah, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed." Because he was still God of mercy. But friends, his mercy has a limit, doesn't it? We'll read that in just a minute, but one more. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8, Jesus Christ the same yesterday and today and forever. You know that verse, Hebrews 13:8. But remember, friends, this God has limits to his mercy. We noted last week in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Today some would vainly hope that God will grant unlimited time to insubordinate people for them to repent of their apostasy, and they believe it is safe for them to stay within a disobedient, a rebellious, even an apostate corpus. The members are told that God is too merciful to visit people in judgment. They are advised, look at all the great and wonderful institutions which God has permitted us to build up as monuments to his glory. We have these great health institutions. We have these great churches. We have this great general conference. Would God forsake such a people and such an organization, they ask? Inspiration tells us in Signs of the Times of January 6 of 1881, paragraph 14, when men urge that God is too merciful to punish the transgressors of his law, let them look to Calvary. Let them realize that it was because Christ took upon himself the guilt of the disobedient and suffered in the sinner's stead that the sword of justice was awakened against the Son of God. My disobedience, your disobedience. This is why Calvary existed. But Calvary didn't exist so that we can continue in this disobedience. But of course, we say today, God is different. Times have changed. This couldn't happen to us. What about the Jewish people? In the book Christ Object Lessons, on page 294 in paragraph 2, we are told there that the Jewish people cherished the idea that they were the favorites of heaven. They cherished it. I don't know what that word means to you. You know, you can like something, you can love it. When you cherish it, that's a very deep experience. The Jewish people cherished the idea that they were the favorites of heaven and that they were always to be exalted as the church of God. They were the children of Abraham, they declared, and so firm did the foundation of their prosperity seem to them that they defied earth and heaven to dispossess them of their rights. They would defy heaven. You cannot take this away from us. But by lives of unfaithfulness, they were preparing for the condemnation of heaven and for separation from God. We read a little bit from Ezekiel 9 earlier. Remember? Ezekiel 9? Ezekiel 9 is a reaction to what happens in Ezekiel 8, 4 abominations. And God sends out slaughtering angels. Slaughtering angels. And that angel, that chief angel comes back and says, we have done as thou hast commanded. We are told in Testimonies for the Church, volume 5, page 211, paragraph 2, and I've broken it up into two slides so it makes it a little easier to read. Here we see that the church, the Lord's sanctuary, was the first to feel the stroke of the wrath of God. The ancient men, those to whom God had given great light and who had stood as guardians of the spiritual interests of the people, had what? They had betrayed their trusts. They had taken the position that we need not look for miracles and marked manifestations of God's power as in former days. And it continues. Times have changed. Remember, people think times have changed. Times have changed. These words strengthen their unbelief, and they say, the Lord will not do good, neither will he do evil. He is too merciful to visit his people in judgment. Thus, peace and safety is the cry for men who will never again lift up their voice like a trumpet to show God's people their transgressions and the house of Jacob their sins. Although they might lift up their voice for other things, they might lift up their voice to give peace and safety, but not like a trumpet to show the people of God their sins. These dumb dogs about as low as anything God ever calls anyone needs word. These dumb dogs that would not bark are the ones who feel the just vengeance of offended God. But it doesn't end there, does it? It doesn't end there. It says men, maidens, and little children, taf in Hebrew, all perish together. Men, maidens, and little children all perish together. And I ask you why? But now you know, don't you? It's because they identified corporally with the guilt of their leaders and refused to exercise their individual responsibility. The God who held the sons and sons' wives and their little children guilty with Dathan and Abiram, the God who held the family of Achan accountable, will visit in judgment not only the leadership of those who have betrayed sacred trust, but also the laity, the men and women with their families, who by their corporate identity have supported that leadership by acquiescing to the apostasy, and who have upheld their hands by theirs and even at times the Lord's means. That's right. Is it not time, friends, for an awakening? What shall we do? What shall we do? The Bible has an answer for us. In Revelation chapter 18, I'll start reading in verse 1. Revelation 18:1. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean, hateful bird. He's not told us to do anything yet. He's just giving us the backdrop. Here's what's going on. But now, in verses 3 and 4, he tells us, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And so what must we do, John? John doesn't have the answer, but he hears the answer from heaven. The answer is given to him from heaven. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, come out of Babylon, come out of this confusion, come out of this apostasy, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. Ultimately, friends, when we stay corporately accountable to an apostate body, we will eventually partake of its sins. We mentioned Ezekiel 8:9. I'd like for you to look at a text, Ezekiel 11 and verse 15. And keep in mind that the prophecy of Ezekiel 8:9 continues all the way into chapter 11. It's a continuous prophecy. And in Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 15, Son of man, thy brethren, even thy brethren, the men of thy kindred, and all the house of Israel holy, are they unto whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, Get you far from the Lord, unto us is this land given in possession. So he's saying to Ezekiel and his brethren, those who would be faithful like Ezekiel, here's what you're going to hear from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the leaders of the church. They're going to tell you, get you out, for unto us this land is given possession. This is a prophecy of disfellowshipment among the faithful people of God. You might say, well, if I'm going to be disfellowshipped, Brother Allen, why do I need to worry about my corporate accountability? They're going to put me out. But friends, this happens after the fulfillment of those abominations of Ezekiel 8, which are not quite yet fully done, but very close. But very close. And my point is that the longer you stay with something like this, the longer you associate with something like this, the harder it's going to be to ever leave it. And there will be some who've tried to help, who've tried to stand up, who've spoken up, and they're going to be put out. Some have already been put out. But if we ourselves have the opportunity to flee trouble, we should flee it before trouble throws us away, because we may not be able to flee later. It may not be so easy. So I ask you again, are you willing to be a good Nazi? Would you be a good KKK member? What's worse? Being a Nazi or a member of a church? Listen to me carefully. What is worse? Being a Nazi or being a member of a church that is sending people to hell. I've been to the Auschwitz-Birkenau camps twice. I've been there. I have seen the ovens that people were burned in, the skin and boned bodies of people that were left. I have seen the rooms where people were gassed by hundreds. No doubt about it, the Nazis were terrible people who practiced some of the worst human atrocities that have ever been committed. Systematic war crimes, including massacres, mass rapes, looting, the exploitation of forced labor, the murder of 3,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and, of course, the participation in the extermination of 6 million, at least, Jews with labor camps and gas chambers. Terrible human experiments were perpetrated upon the weak and the innocent. Today in the United States Navy, in the subsequent class, Sister Annika was telling us about the United States ensign who was in charge of the California there as it was being sunk. The United States Navy today has charts that tell you how long a person can last in cold water, varying in different temperatures. For example, they can tell you how long a person will last in cold water if it's 40 degrees, how long they'll last in 50 degrees before they get hypothermia and drown, how long will they last in 20-degree weather. Do you know how they got those charts? Do you know how they got those charts? They got them from the Nazis. They found them. Because the Nazis had done these kind of experiments. They would take tanks of water, they would cool them to a certain temperature, put people in them, see how long they lasted till they died. That's how we have those charts today. It's not because we experimentally found them out. The Nazis piped truck exhaust into rooms with retarded and invalid people who could not be productive to society. You like that idea? Would you belong to a group that did something like that? We would never condone that, would we? The KKK did a lot more than burn crosses in people's yards. They hung many black persons for the crime of simply being of African descent. They shot and murdered even white people who dared to help black people vote or gain access to white areas. We would never stay in an organization like that today, would we? Would we? Could we? I ask you the question, do we, could we do worse? And I ask that question based upon this cryptic statement of Jesus. Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. Matthew 10:28. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. The Nazis were able to kill the body, weren't they? But rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. But friends, what if we are attending a corpus, or we are part of a corpus that Satan has now become the conductor of it? And yes, there is a prophetic vision about him becoming the conductor of that train. What's worse? Do I fear the ones who kill the body? No, I fear the ones worse, the ones who are doing the worst sin, who will condemn my soul to hell. You think the Nazis were bad because they burned up the bodies. Well, at least they let them be dead before they burned them. And just so there's no misunderstanding, so I may speak so clearly and plainly that no one will misunderstand me. The corporate Seventh-day Adventist Church, which has headquarters in Silver Springs, Maryland today, that today is a church that is training people how to disobey God, how to reject the final atonement, how to deny that Jesus really is the Son of God, how to deny that He is the truly crucified one who died for our sins. What's worse? Who's worse, them or the Nazis? That sounds crazy, doesn't it? Think about it. It's not so crazy as it sounds. But yet Jesus said in John 17 and verse 3, "This is life eternal, that they might know Thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom Thou hast sent." You don't think this issue of knowing Jesus as the Son of God is a salvational issue? 1 John 5:12. He that hath the Son hath what? Life. It doesn't say he who has Jesus, but he who has the Son. Jesus is the Son of God, the literal Son of God. And he that hath not the Son of God hath not life, friends. This is solemn to think about. If you wish, I believe in liberty. I believe in freedom. If you wish to be associated with Babylon in any of its various facets, that is your decision. You can do that. I've had this discussion with a lot of people. That's what you want to do. You can do this. But friends, I want to tell you, you do it at the peril of your soul. God has given you free will, but according to the Word of God, it will ultimately lead to your destruction. We mentioned, as I think our first text last week, Luke 14:33. It's our next to last text today. Because it teaches us that Jesus will not accept divided loyalties, divided allegiance. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. The principle is, we can't have Jesus in something else. We can't have Jesus in someone else. We can't have Jesus in some corporate body that is in disobedience to him, that is actually in rebellion and apostate toward him. And so I would like to close with simply this verse from Revelation 3:22. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. And may God bless you lots and lots and lots.